Good evening and welcome to the 2017 Urban Stream Symposium. My name is Keith Bondog Wynn and I am the Stormwater Quality Supervisor for the City of Salem Public Works Department. In this capacity, I oversee a talented team of individuals dedicated to protecting our stormwater resources, both natural and built. Tonight, we showcase the accomplishments of this year's Public Works Stream Crew internship program. We also acknowledge our toughest challenges in maintaining our natural and built infrastructure in a rapidly changing climate on an even swifter changing urban landscape. Now, the Stream Crew program is very near and dear to my heart, not only because of the privilege I've had of managing the program for the past 3 years, but because I too served on the Stream Crew while I was an undergraduate in college. I was first hired onto the crew in the summer of 2003 after completing my junior year at Willamette University, where I studied environmental science and political science. It was the first year since its inception in 1998 that the stream cleaning program began hiring college students with an educational background in natural resources and environmental science. Prior to that, the city hired physical laborers who indiscriminately cleared trash and vegetation for the sole purpose of flood prevention. Over time, as the cumulative amount of trash, debris, and vegetation in the creeks gradually decreased as a result of our annual maintenance efforts, the interns began working alongside full-time staff, lending not only an extra hand, but an extra brain, a different perspective, new ways of doing things, to address emerging concerns in our watershed. Over time, the Stream Crew's function has grown to become not only a pillar of protection for our community, but a complementary collegiate resource in helping the Public Works Department address our community's shared challenges. Tonight's symposium demonstrates that programmatic shift from simply removing grocery carts from creeks and streams to actual meaningful field data collection methods, from merely weed whacking to actual soil sampling and vegetation plot analyses, and from within our creeks and streams into our community's consciousness. As members of academia, government, business, and community organizations, we need to foster student interest at the collegiate level in public works and the interdisciplinary challenges facing our communities to ensure that our organizations are competitive in attracting smart, engaged employees and volunteers. By sharing data, information, resources, experience, and expertise, the community as a whole benefits from well-educated, well-trained, and experienced college students entering the workforce prepared to tackle our community's most pressing concerns. The Stream Crew program that started in the 1990s has matured into an integral component of the Public Works Department of 2017. And I invite each and every one of you to consider joining our team. Whether you are an educator, career counselor, engineering consultant, or community member, your investment in time and resources to our program is an investment in our community. I propose a challenge to all of you that as we continue to identify and develop capital improvement projects to secure our community's infrastructure, let us at the same time recognize that investing in social capital improvement projects or programs like the city's Public Works internship program is how we will tackle today's challenges and secure a sustainable workforce into the future. I hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation and I invite you all to meet with our interns after the program. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Meredith Greer, and this is Joshua Eckerly, and we're the environmental aides for the 2017 Stream Crew. One moment, please.
Bear with us. We're going to get this up for you guys.
While we're waiting for our projector to warm up, I'll give you guys a quick recap of what you're going to hear tonight. So the 14 interns you see before you are all part of this year's stream cleaning crew, and they're going to give presentations on various aspects that they've been a part of. Joshua and I are going to, are going to recap the 2017 season and a little bit of the program overview before we get to hear more in-depth parts of what the rest of the crew does, from our wetlands crew to special projects that each of the individual interns have been working on in groups.
All right.
Perfect. So without further ado, we'll get started.
Is that not working out too? Great. Coming up aces.
Point to the projector.
It's back in the computer, and it's worked the entire time. There we go.
So here's a little bit of the program outline that I just told you guys about. And this is Josh and I again. So I'm going to give you a little kind of like 5-minute shotgun version of the regulatory permits and drivers behind the stream cleaning crew. So the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, which kind of took a different look at how the United States as a whole deals with our water, and especially in urban areas. The 1972 Act requires or dictates that all municipal governments are considered point sources of pollution. And so there are two main types of pollution: point source, where you know exactly where it's coming from, and non-point source, where it's harder to tell exactly where it's coming from. The Clean Water Act determined that every single municipal government is a source of point source of pollution. And so because of that, we have to start regulating how we deal with pollution that comes from, whether it's waste or it's more like chemicals that are coming off of our roads. So, as a subpoint of the Clean Water Act, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, divides up how municipal cities are run based on the type of sewer system that they have. So Salem, unlike Portland, has a separate sewer system. Every single storm grate that you see on the side of the road leads directly into a stream or creek. So that means that the water isn't being processed before it gets discharged. In Portland, they have a combined system where the runoff gets treated just like sewer water does in treatment plants. And so because of this, Salem has to take extra precautions to try and mitigate the amount of pollution and other kind of debris that are getting into our creeks and streams since it's not being treated. The Municipal Separate Sewer Storm System, or MS4 permit, is broken down based on the population of each city. So phase 1 permits are for cities that are above 100,000 people. That's where Salem falls in. And that just means that the parameters for which Salem has to meet thresholds for total daily maximum loads of various pollutants are different than cities that are smaller just due to size. Because of this, the city has to come up with a stormwater management plan, and this is individual to each city. They get to decide which best management practices they want to initiate in order to try and keep these levels of pollutants down into acceptable levels. The city of Salem has 66 different BMPs. The stream cleaning program is one of them. So the stream cleaning crew has two major focuses. One is for pollution prevention, and the other is for flood mitigation. We have total measurable goals that we need to hit every single season. We have to walk half of the miles of streams and creeks within the urban growth boundary, which is roughly 45 miles. In addition, we have to complete one restoration project. Along the way, the crew collects various amounts of data, as well as trash and other debris, in order to try and keep the streams as clean as possible. The stream cleaning crew hasn't always looked like this. As Keith mentioned before, the 1996 flood in Salem is what really spurred the stream cleaning crew program. This picture up here is of where the old hospital was. As you can see, Shelton Ditch had completely flooded its banks, and the majority of the city, and especially in the downtown area, was very much underwater. So in 1998, the city of Salem decided to try and take steps in order to minimize flooding. That's when they first hired and started the stream cleaning crew, but it looked a lot different than it does today. It was mostly a group of hard laborers whose main goal was trying to optimize and increase the amount of conveyance in the streams. So their goal was trying to get water from off the streets and into the creeks and ultimately to the Willamette as fast as possible. Now, as the stream cleaning crew has changed and as regulations and thoughts about the environment have changed as well, they started adding to it. In 2000, it became a requirement from our permit to complete one restoration project. These are generally done in riparian areas in order to try and both help the urban area, but also be aware that these are natural systems. In 2003, they took it one step further by requiring that every member of the crew is a current or recent college graduate focusing mainly in environmental studies or natural resource management. The stream cleaning crew has been evolving ever since. Now, it is not only trying to build work experience, but also to provide an additional education. The stream cleaning interns walk 45 miles of streams and creeks, and clean up debris as well as garbage and other materials, which is more of hands-on experience, getting a lot of what they've learned in the classrooms and putting it to real-world application. In addition, it is also an internship, so we really try and stress learning and being educated, especially about urban waterways. So as this photo shows, we take a number of field trips throughout the year. This one in particular is at the Willow Lake Treatment Facility, which is the wastewater treatment plant for the city of Salem and Kaiser. We also have Friday forum talks throughout the season where we get experts in various fields, mainly surrounding urban water, to come in and speak to the students in order to expand their breadth of knowledge in urban water. In addition, this season we decided to add special projects, which are student-run, and they are more in-depth studies about the urban streams. Josh is now going to talk a little bit about the measurable goals that the 2017 Stream Crew has hit.
Thank you. I am Josh Eckerly. I'm the environmental aide for this year, and this is what we normally look like. We don't usually look this nice, so that's when you see us normally like that. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of our crew this season, and then let them talk about the projects they've been working on. So as you said, we're all interned and college students or recent graduates. Everybody here has gone to one of these 4 universities and majored in everything from biology, ecology, earth sciences, mathematics, engineering, and geography, giving us a wide breadth of knowledge out in the streams, allowing us to make great decisions and collect all this data for the city. This is how a basic structure of the Stream Crew. We're within the Public Works Department of Salem instead of the Storm Water Quality Division. And our crews are broke up this way. This year we did something new as well. Split us into a stream crew and a wetlands crew, which is a newer thing. So we have people focusing on streams and people focusing on wetlands. Our stream crew is broken up with 2 environmental aides, Meredith and myself, who help run the day-to-day operations, and then 3 additional crews broken up with 3 people with their own additional crew leader. And our wetlands crew is combined of 3 people, our natural resources aide, Carl Lawrence, and his crew of 2. So our scope of work, as you're saying, we're in our 2 crews, and we're really worried about conveyance and trash removal as the ultimate goal. It's what we started with. It's one of our main goals that we do. And now we're also doing debris removal. Now we're using basic data collection with our GIS collector app, which we will hear about after this. We're also doing service requests, which are requests from the public and interdepartmentally, where we'll go and take care of certain things that are in the streams that the stream crew can help with, and also our special projects, which Meredith just spoke on. This is the crew working on cutting back some willows near the stream by the National Guard. So this is where we work. This is Salem, and this is our watershed map. Each color indicates a different stream set in a different watershed. We've combined some watersheds to make it easier for us just for mileage, and some of them are smaller than others. This is a very comprehensive way to look at it. These are the watersheds that we work in, and these numbers here are the associated miles that Stream Crew has already walked, and the miles of stream we've walked in those watersheds. Seeing certain ones like Mill and Pringle, we've put almost 10 miles in each. They're some of our biggest stretches and our most urbanized stretches. So going back, this is our historical look at our data back from when Stream Crew started, and it was mainly just trash collection, and they had not had anything previous, so there was lots of stuff to pick up. Looking all the way back to '98, we had a year of almost 98,000 pounds of trash removed from Salem streams. All the way down to this year, we're only sitting at just under 5,500. You can see a nice negative trend of the annual cleaning really helping getting that trash out of the streams, and allowing Stream Crew to start having this time to do extra projects and keeping the level of trash in the streams much lower annually. For this year, we've divided up here by watershed. For the trash we have removed by watershed, done in pounds. Mill and Pring, like I said, go through the major part of the city, a lot of urban development there, and that is where we see a lot of our trash that we do collect under overpasses and just along its waterways, with Mill coming in at roughly just over 2,000 pounds of trash already removed this season. So also for conveyance, we remove debris jams, woody debris found along streams, deposited over the winter, and get that out of there. So Mill and Pringle then are also coming in very high. They've had lots of overpasses downtown, and lots of overpasses in the downtown area where there's lots of large woody debris that piles up along the pylons, causes possible flooding, and we go in there and remove all of that. Roughly 55 cubic yards of trash or of woody debris this year. So if you can think about that as roughly 4.5 dump truck loads of woody debris we've pulled out of the streams this series so far. So this is what we see on our day-to-day basis. This is pulling out a large woody debris jam from a neighborhood, loading it up and taking it off to green waste. And this is kind of what we'll see at some of our overpasses downtown from trash collected from either homeless camps or just over the years. And we take that and remove it from the streams. So in summary, we have to do a 45 miles of stream every year by our permits. This year we've already done almost 48 miles within our 7 watersheds, removing roughly 5,500 pounds of trash. And to get an idea, if you were to take that trash and evenly distribute it, even though it's not through our watersheds, you'd be finding roughly 115 pounds of trash per mile that we've removed from the city streams. Also the 111 debris jams and the 55 cubic yards, the 4.5 dump trucks we've removed. And still, the internship is not wrapping up just yet. We're going to have a lot of these people through the early fall, and we'll be working on transit camp cleanups, which like the one on that bridge you saw, service requests that I noted, and the special projects that we've talked about. We have broken down to macroinvertebrates, working on looking at bugs to get water composition and quality, looking at hydromodification or erosion points within our city streams, and looking at a wetland evaluation and getting better ideas of how our wetlands function within our city. Now we're going to have Alicia Hubbard and Suzanne Rancine come up and talk about our data collection methods.
Hi there. Again, I'm Alicia Hubbard, and this is
Suzanne Rancine.
And today we're here to talk to you about the importance of ArcGIS in the collector application within our work. So the city provided us with mobile devices that allow us to obtain, update, and distribute points in real-time application. And when working in the field, this is really important because it allows us to communicate directly with those back at the office to report any issues, to continue planning, and make changes as needed.
So just to give you a little bit of background on the past, this app and collection that we're doing is actually a relatively new system. It was implemented last year. Before that, GPSs were only used for weed mapping. In the photo here, you will see Kyle Lawrence, who you'll hear from a little bit later, and a previous crew who are using that little yellow box in the photo, which is called a Trimble for weed mapping. For the stream crew themselves, they didn't have GPSs or any kind of provided instruments to map areas. They actually used paper printed maps where they would put down hand notes and also a general location where they thought they were or they knew they were. Photos of the area were taken on both personal devices such as cell phones or personal cameras, and all of that was brought back into the office, then put into GIS. So accuracy at that time was a little, is a good way to put it. From there on, they would then make decisions. So you didn't have real-time communication. You didn't have necessarily the best accuracy depending on what was happening, and you didn't have a continuous gradient of change throughout the area that you could look at. The Collector app has allowed us to change all of that.
Here, I know you guys already saw this earlier, it's a broad view of the city of Salem, and as you can see, the city is really rich with streams. Again, each boundary is a different watershed within the city. And when we're looking at our own mobile devices and see this map, there's points don't appear until we zoom in, which helps us to eliminate any clutter and then really focus in on our work areas.
So this is an example of our layers that we can use. Each of these layers signifies something that we're looking for, such as infrastructures that are showing something, plant species, erosion points or otherwise. Each one of these layers has been specifically designed for something that we want to look for currently and in the future. They can be turned on and off by the little radial bubbles you see there in blue. Thank you for whoever is calling into this conversation. Thank you. So it makes it very easy. If we just want to look for bank erosion, we can turn that just on, or we can look at our whole entire layer system. And we can also make layers for specialty events, such as the lovely eclipse we had here in Salem, and I'll be talking about that in a bit.
So each point has its own unique symbol, as you can see in the legend in the middle. For example, debris jams. We have one for red, which is not clear debris jam, and a green symbol for, yes, the debris jam has been cleared. And this really helps us see our work that we've done so far, like the progress, and then also the areas where work still needs to be performed. And then on the left-hand side, you can see when all the symbols are turned on, it almost creates the status of the stream for us. When we want to look at it as a whole, we can kind of assess the stream by looking at the points that we see. And then we also have a layer for priority stream cleaning reaches, which you can see on the right-hand side. This is a little section from Pringle Creek. Same with the one on the right and left are both from Pringle. But our priority stream cleaning reaches are categorized as major, moderate, and minor concerns based upon areas that are prone to flooding. And in the Pringle one, you can see the highlights there. When we are approaching an area that's highlighted red, we know to examine this area at a higher level and pay really close attention to any debris jams or any possible potential flooding hazards as a whole.
So how do we get information into these lovely points? We have a field based on what points we're looking at. Up here is an example of our bank erosion field. So each of these fields has specific things we want to be on the lookout for. For bank erosion, be the height and length of the bank erosion, a comment about what it's looking like, and then other things that we want to take in. What's great about these fields, it's not just a one-time only. We can come back later, update them from year to year to year. And on top of that, we can add in photos to actually show us what we are seeing verbally, actually in the real form. So we can actually see how these areas improve or degrade, and we can make management plans for not only our part of public works, but allow other people in public works to also make management plans based upon what we see in real life, in real time. Sorry. So I talked a little bit about we have those layers that you can update, and we can actually create different layers for specialty events. This is our layer actually in real life for our solar eclipse that happened, a big event that happened here in Salem. And how do you manage such a big event? Each one of these lime green squares represents a real park in our town, and it also represents a real data point that was taken. Each one of these data points where we could take photos of the people that were in our parks, who was camping in our parks, and we could also update and communicate interdepartmentally beyond just text and phone calls at peak moments and show what was happening in real time. So we can make plans for things that may be happening, like garbage cans filling up or the parking lots filling up, or helping to get people to other parks so they could have a great event and not have to feel so crowded during our solar eclipse. It showed its real worth, not only just as a field application, but also as something that we can use beyond just the field for these specialty events. It's been a great application to use, and we are hoping that it can be further used in the future for not only once-in-a-lifetime events such as the solar eclipses.
And now for our natural resources overview.
Good evening. So my name is Kyle Lawrence. I am the Natural Resources Aide for the Stream Crew this summer. And with me are my crew members, Glenda Tucker-Cerniak and Matthew Mischke. And so essentially I want to give a brief overview of what the Natural Resource Crew encompasses in relation to the Stream Crew. So this year, it's kind of a brand new idea that was brought about of creating an individual wetland crew essentially for data collection purposes. In past years, usually we choose specific stream crew members to do the data collection. This year we decided that our wetlands have kind of not necessarily been neglected, but they could use a little more attention, so we want to do more comprehensive surveys, and so that's kind of what our crew's been about.
So some of the different activities that we did included invasive weed mapping, habitat assessments, GSI monitoring, and also in the coming future, restoration plans. So you're probably wondering, why does our work matter? Well, effectively, maintaining our city wetlands and GSI shows that we ultimately care about your tax dollars at work. It is also important to understand the form and function of our facilities and wetlands so that we can attack problems as they arise. And it is also vital to keep an eye and monitor invasive species outbreaks before they get into bigger issues. So right now I want to explain essentially in a brief way how wetlands operate. So you'll see essentially we'll get precipitation in different forms from rain to snow, and essentially they'll trickle into the wetlands. And essentially what the wetlands do is act as a natural sponge in that they soak up any excess water over time, and they slowly attenuate, which is essentially releasing water back into the streams, but in a cleaner and less turbid way. And so you probably, in order to explain more of the importance of wetlands, in recent years there's been more of a focus on flood mitigation, and that's kind of one of the primary ecological services that wetlands provide is flood mitigation. They also provide an important function for the stormwater department as far as pollutant reduction, so we can meet our political goals. And they also provide a wide plethora of other services, including recreation, education, carbon sequestration, groundwater recharge, and biodiversity. Here's essentially a brief layout of the different wetlands and their location within the Salem boundary. As you see up north, we have Gibson Creek Natural Area, which is based in West Salem, which is roughly just under 15 acres. Claggett Creek Natural Area, which is our city's largest wetland overall, is about 42 acres. Fairview Natural Area, which is our second largest overall, is based in southeast Salem. We have Edwards Mitigation Wetland, which is our smallest wetland located in southeast Salem, which is just rising under 4 acres. And finally, we have our Wallen Mitigation Wetland, which is one of our younger wetlands located in the very southern tip of Salem. Some of the brief characteristics of Claggett Creek are that it was originally a mitigation wetland, is actually a rock quarry at one point that was converted into a natural area for flood mitigation, but also to mitigate for urban expansion in the North Salem area. And it is also prime wildlife habitat, as you'll see later on. We also have in West Salem Gibson Creek Natural Area, which is actually the city's only true natural area in that it wasn't developed for mitigation, but it is actually there to accommodate for urban expansion in the north or northwestern tip of Salem. And it also, Gibson Creek actually flows through it, and it is also prime habitat for a lot of wildlife species. Here we have Fairview Wetlands, which is actually divided into two separate parcels, Parcel 1 and Parcel 5, both of which are totally different ecosystems in that they are hydrologically disconnected, meaning that the stream activity that happens in one wetland is totally separate of the other. We also have Wallen Mitigation Wetland in South Salem, which was actually built roughly less than 5 years ago as a result of urban expansion in South Salem, but also to realign Wallen Creek. And finally, we have Edwards Wetland, which is a neighborhood natural area located in southeast Salem, and it was formed as a result of urban expansion in that neighborhood. and is pretty much another mitigation wetland to accommodate for said reasons. And at this point, I will send you over to Linda, where she'll describe what we've done so far this season.
Okay, so as Kyle mentioned earlier, one of the first things we did this season was map invasive plants. We did this using the collector app that Suzanne and Alicia showed you before. Basically, we'd use this, we'd walk around an area that has invasive plants, and the collector app would actually kind of draw the shape where we were walking. And then we would estimate the percent ground cover of the species. You know, it might be 10%, 50%, something like that. And we'd also collect additional information, such as if there was sun or shade, what kind of soil there was, if the soil was saturated or not. So you might actually be asking yourself, why would we bother to map the invasive species? Or maybe you might want to know what is an invasive species. It might not be a term you've encountered before. So an invasive species is basically any species that has a negative ecological, economic, or human health impact. And we end up spending a lot of money kind of combating these, you know, using herbicides to get rid of it, paying people to pull it. If it's a human health impact, we might be spending money to combat diseases. Agricultural pests might be causing crop losses, so we end up spending a lot of money dealing with them. So we want to know how much we have, because that's going to dictate how we approach management. So this curve in this graph up here is called the generalized invasion curve, and it basically shows, you know, how a species is growing in area over time. So this is time, this is the area occupied. So where you are along that curve is going to determine what kind of management you're going to do. So everyone wants to be down here in the prevention area where we don't actually have the species present. Basically, you put just a little bit of money into it and you're gonna get a lot back, because you're not gonna be spending all that money, you know, trying to pull it or apply herbicides or deal with crop losses or anything like that. Unfortunately, some of them do get through even with prevention. And then you basically have a small population here, and you can eradicate it at that point. You can spend a little bit of money and effort, you can get rid of it, take it out, it'll be gone, and you'll be saving a lot of money in the long term. Unfortunately, when you get to this point, usually the species is going to be too big for you to actually get rid of it. And at that point, you're going to want to just try to contain it so it doesn't spread to other areas that you really care about. And at this point, the economic returns kind of get a little bit less, because you have to kind of keep at them year after year just to make sure they don't spread. And then ultimately, if your species covers enough area and it's very widespread, Himalayan blackberry is a really great example of this. It's there, it's going to spread wherever it wants, and you're basically just going to want to identify what assets are important to you, and you're going to have to keep going at them every year. Like, say you have it in your yard, you're going to have to go every year, you're going to have to pull it, cut it, burn it, do whatever you're going to do, and you're just going to have to keep going back over and over again. And you're not going to get a lot back for your money, but it's something that's important to you, so you're going to keep doing it. So again, we map our invasive species so that we know how much we have, so we can decide where we want to be on here. So this is an example of one of the maps we ended up creating. This is for the Gibson Creek Natural Area. So you can see all of these shapes are little patches of invasive plants. In this particular map, the colors are what species they are. So the green is English ivy, the purple color here is reed canary grass, and this kind of burgundy color is Himalayan blackberry. And then there's this little light green one right there is tansy ragwort. We could also make this map display the percent cover if we wanted to look at that information. We could also even do something like sun or shade or soil saturation. We can really make the map display anything we want for those colors, as long as we collected that data. And this over here shows, it's just an aerial view of the same area, and it basically just shows that you can't really do this like from remote sensing. You really have to get on the ground and do the work that we did to get high resolution data. So this is a general overview of the findings for the season. We found 16 invasive species across all the wetlands. The most common species were cattail, Himalayan blackberry, reed canary grass, English ivy, and pennyroyal. That's in order of the area they took up. And the Edwards wetland actually had the greatest overall cover of invasive species out of all those wetlands. So after we completed our weed mapping, we actually went out there and did habitat assessments in all of the wetlands. So we conducted assessments in 37 plots. And basically a plot was a circular plot that had a 5-meter radius, and we would go into those plots and we would identify every single plant species that was there, which was challenging at times. And we would estimate the percent ground cover, Then we would also determine the wetland indicator status, which is basically just the probability of it being found in a wetland or not. They have terms like obligate upland species, which means it's 99% of the time found in wetlands. That's just one example. And we also determined if a species was native, non-native, or invasive. And that's a really important distinction. I mentioned that we only found 16 invasive species. They have to have those negative impacts. There are also a lot of non-native species that we don't really know if it has any kind of impact. Maybe it doesn't have any at all, and we just think it's an eyesore, or we don't want it because we want something else to be there. So there's a lot of species that are just non-native, but they aren't doing anything harmful. So that's important to think about. And last, we also looked at the soil saturation, if it was inundated with water, if it was just kind of moist, or if there was saturation way below the surface. So this is kind of a breakdown of the plants that we found, native versus non-native in all of our wetlands. So you can see that in Fairview 1 and 5, there were actually more non-native species than native species, and it was the opposite for all of the other wetlands. But again, that's perfectly fine. Out of the species we found 135 total species. 72 of them were native, and the other 63 were non-native, but only 16 of them were invasive. So those other non-native plants are actually, helping with the biodiversity of these wetlands. We also kept a running list of all the wildlife that we encountered when we were doing these habitat assessments, and we actually found that they are really, really rich in wildlife. We were able to actually identify 35 species, which included 28 birds, 3 mammals, 2 amphibians, a spider, and a crayfish. But we also saw a lot of things that we couldn't actually identify. There were a few birds that we only kind of glimpsed of and couldn't really tell what it was. And there were lots and lots of insects, like different butterflies, dragonflies, damselflies. We're unfortunately not entomologists, so we don't know what everything is. But there were actually lots more species than just those 35. So they're actually really wonderful areas. They're very biodiverse. And just a few highlights. In Fairview, we saw 2 families of black-tailed deer. We saw this Pacific chorus frog, and in Claggett is a birding paradise. There are so many herons and sandpipers. It's a really great place. So after we finished up in the wetlands, we actually turned our attention to green stormwater infrastructure, known as GSI for short. So these facilities actually mimic natural wetland hydrology that Kyle told us about earlier. And they help reduce stormwater runoff through infiltration or filtration, which is kind of how the water kind of trickles down through the soils, and as well as evapotranspiration, which is basically the process that plants do to kind of take up water up through their bodies, and then they release it into the atmosphere as water vapor. And it also lets stormwater kind of get reused rather than just be sent off in a pipe somewhere. It actually gets to water plants and go into the ground. And this actually offers better protection of water quality and stream habitat compared to traditional stormwater management. Traditionally, it would be something like a concrete basin with a pipe, and it would just collect the water and send it on its way. Whereas in these cases, it basically slows down your water and lets it kind of soak into the ground, and it's a lot more effective, and it also reduces the risk of flooding and stream erosion. So what we did is we went to 38 facilities across the city. We looked at a variety of age groups. We looked at brand new ones that were a year old, facilities that were 2 to 5 years, and those that were older than 6 years. And we also looked at different types. There are rain gardens, there are roadside planters, there are bioswales, there's little filteras that go around the trees. There's a very wide variety of these around the city. And we extracted soil samples. We measured substrate depth and the type. Was it sandy? Was it loamy? Was it clay? We also looked at the plant health and made planting recommendations. If there were some plants that were, dried up and dying, maybe they were more of a wetland plant and we needed something that didn't quite need as much water because it gets quite dry here in the summer. And the soil sampling that we did was really important for understanding the functional characteristics of the GSIs. Basically because if you have all these things that we tested for, like heavy metals, sulfates, pH, soluble salts, nitrogen, and phosphorus, they can really affect plant growth and even kill plants sometimes, and plants are really a vital part of these GSIs, so it's important that we understand what's in the soil. And we sent these samples to A&L Labs in Portland. We don't have the results yet, so unfortunately I don't have anything to tell you about that, but we are in the process. And now I will pass this off to Matthew to tell you about potential project enhancements.
So in addition to the work we did that you guys have already heard of, we're also starting the early parts of a process of developing some enhancement plans for a couple of our wetlands. So the first one up is Edwards Street Wetland, or Edwards Mitigation Wetland. This is, as mentioned before, the smallest one of our bunch, and it's just a little less than 4 acres, and it's right in the middle of a neighborhood. So it's a really good opportunity to enhance this wetland. There's been, maintenance hasn't been necessarily what it could have been for this site, and there's definitely some work to be done. And so since we already need to do some work to help enhance the stormwater potential of this site, it seemed like a good idea to take the opportunity and really make this a community resource. So we drew up here some rough ideas of where a trail could go around the wetland and where some interpretive signs could be, where these little green boxes are. Doing this kind of development can really help the public to understand these wetlands better. Using these kinds of interpretive signs can really help people to understand what they're looking at, what the ecology is, what kind of plant species and animal species might be around. And trail building, like what's happening here at Croydon Scenic Trail, this is the Salem Trails Alliance. They are a volunteer group that go through and work on hiking trails around the city. This kind of work can really help people feel invested in the wetland or in any natural area that they're working in, and it's a really good opportunity to understand what they're looking at. So the other site we're looking at for enhancement, another place we're starting a plan for, is Claggett Creek Natural Area. You're going to hear a lot more detail about Claggett Creek in the next presentation. But it is in North Salem. This blob right here is the Kroc Center. And so this is a great big facility that, as we mentioned before, has some of the highest species diversity and is also one of our largest facilities. There's an idea here for where we could have a trail that could come around and loop through so you could get a good look at the ponds where a lot of the wildlife is, and more signs scattered about, a restroom in case people want to stay for a while for like part of a day, and a parking lot, that kind of thing. There's also a really good opportunity here for partnerships with local groups. So putting in these kind of facilities, again, can allow people like birders, especially out at Claggett, where we found the most of our bird species, and especially our big pretty ones, you know, herons, red-winged blackbirds, kingfishers, that kind of thing. This can be a really great resource for birders. It can also be a really great opportunity for outdoor education and for understanding the world that we live in and why wetlands are important. So right now, Edwards and Claggett Creek Natural Area both do provide some services to the city. They provide flood mitigation not only for Salem, but Claggett Creek also provides flood mitigation for the city of Kaiser because of where it's positioned on Claggett Creek. And Edwards and Claggett both provide good ecology and habitat, but this is what Edwards looks like right now, and it's not the most welcoming environment. It's definitely a little overrun. There's some management that needs to be done, but with some of the additions we're talking about and that we're drafting up plans for, there would be opportunities for recreation, community education, field trips, that kind of thing. Improved flood mitigation as we're able to repair some of the hydrology in these sites, and community development. So what we want you guys to take away is that Salem's wetlands are a crucial part of our stormwater infrastructure, that they slow down the water and that they are there for sponges, and that's really important to remember. Because our wetlands and our GSIs are such an important part of our stormwater infrastructure, they need maintenance and they need monitoring, so we can understand if new invasive species are coming in, if there's been big shifts in the hydrology, if something collapses somewhere underground. We need to know what's going on with them so we can best maintain our city. And these kind of recreation and enhancement activities can really help show people that we care and help them to understand why wetlands are important. We also had a lot of fun, you know. But that's all we have for now. We also have a table over in the corner when the presentation is done. If you guys want to see some of the plants we looked at or see some of the places we walked around in, see how we did soil sampling, you can come and talk to us. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to switch up gears a little bit here and talk less about the field work we've been doing this season. And as Keith spoke earlier about the special projects that we've been working on, the second half of the season, our crew's been working on their special research projects, and we're going to let them speak more to that now.
So each season, there's a diverse group of interns, and we're very fortunate this year to have a number of interns with a variety in background. And so based on that, they were able to choose different groups that they wanted to be a part of to take kind of a more in-depth look at the Salem streams. Our whole goal is to to start treating the streams as assets. And one way of doing that is gathering more information that's not just about garbage, but more about how the area is being impacted by humans and by the amount of water going through that. So we're going to hear a little bit about the 3 projects that the interns have been working on. Mind you, these are all work in progresses, and so we don't have final results quite yet, but they're going to take you on a little quick journey through the process that they're going through right now, and you'll have more time to ask them more in-depth questions after the presentation. Without further ado, the Wetland Evaluation crew will come up first.
Hello, I'm Jonah.
I'm Brewster Johnson.
And I'm Bryce Funk.
And you've all already heard from Matthew Mischke and or Kyle Lawrence from the Wetlands crew. And together we're the Wetlands Evaluation team. The goal of our evaluation study was to design a holistic model for determining the monetary value of Salem's wetlands. This is important because of all of Salem's lands, an aggregate 4% of all of Salem can be classified as a wetland. As the Wetlands crew has already pointed out, wetlands provide a myriad of very important ecological services for the public, including but not limited to flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, water filtration, and wildlife habitat. The development of an efficient evaluation model will both aid the preservation of these important ecological services, as well as aid the city in better managing and using these resources that they have at their disposal and that we've already invested in. This is the first year the stream crew has attempted this project, and like Meredith said, this is still a project in the works, but we are here to show you what we have right now and the methodology and thought process we have adapted. All right, so we are using the Claggett Creek wetland as our first subject for evaluation. We chose the Claggett wetland. The wetland crew has already talked a little bit about it, because of its very unique size, its history, its services it provides to our neighbors in Kaiser, the flood mitigation it provides Kaiser, and its unique history. Boom. So here are some slides showing Claggett throughout the years. Back in the 90s, the Claggett wetland was actually being used as a gravel mine owned by the J.C. Compton Company. In 1997, to further their mining efforts, the J.C. Compton Company dewatered the original pond to further its mining efforts. The post-mine land was originally planned to be used for an industrial park, to be developed into an industrial park. But instead, the city purchased the land from the company and hopes to use it for a wetlands restoration project to both restore the wetland to its former status, as well as try to offset the soon-to-be-constructed Croc Center and the water, the wetlands it would displace, which you can see over here. So the J.C. Compton Company sold the land to the city and has since been pretty cooperative with the city, both the city and the Claggett Creek Watershed Council, in completing the project. In 2004, the mining operations officially ended, and the ponds we see today were refilled for reclamation. In 2005, new streams were dug out with the appropriate sinuosity, providing water to the floodplains, providing a slow flow, enhanced habitat, and most importantly, mitigation for stormwater runoff. Later, thousands of trees, shrubs, and other appropriate wetland vegetation was planted. And finally, in 2010, after a formal 5-year monitoring period, the Department of State Lands and the Army Corps of Engineers approved the Claggett site as a sustainable, healthy wetland effective in mitigating floods. Here we have some slides showing both the 2007 and 2012 flood events. And here you can kind of get a better idea of the ability of Claggett to absorb water, to hold water, retain water, and most importantly, keep all this water out of our city. Now here's Brewster to explain some more of our methodology.
Thank you, Jonah. Just 1 second here. All right. So while we were looking into the background of Claggett Creek Natural Area and the wetland that it hosts, we looked into some of the spatial relationships. So using GIS, Geographic Information Systems, we were able to take elevation data and then determine which areas are draining on the landscape into our wetland. So all the way to the left, you'll see that that's the citywide scale and the catchment delineation, which is in yellow, bordered in yellow, takes up a large chunk of the city and actually extends into Hayesville. And then we have the wetland itself delineated all the way to the right using imagery analysis and some ground truthing that our crew had done by going to the site and identifying wetland vegetation, and some data that we were able to pull from a couple other areas where wetland delineations have been done. So that's how we came up with the delineation all the way to the right, which is about 26.1 acres in area. And the catchment area is substantially larger at 4,210 acres of catchment, which is actually about 160 times larger than our wetland area. However, in theory, all of that water would only drain into the wetland if that was 100% impervious surface, and that is not the case. About 5% of that area is open space, which can be thought of as a permeable surface where water can infiltrate into and then not end up in the wetland. And there are about 44 water quality facilities, both green stormwater infrastructure and more of the conventional water quality facilities. And those two take on some of the water load that would otherwise go into our wetland. You can also see here that South Fork of Claggett Creek and East Fork Claggett Creek converge rather close to the wetland and then flow into and through the wetland into Kaiser, which was mentioned earlier, how some of those relationships play out. But more locally speaking, the drainage is an interaction between the riparian wetland on both sides of the creek in the natural area and the creek itself. So here you can see we looked into the past a little bit, and then we pulled the Salem Area Comprehensive Plan land use file to demonstrate what sort of land uses are in our catchment area, which can inform what sort of pollutants we can expect to see now and in the future. So a couple of figures I'd like to point out on this map here is that our predominant land use in our catchment area is 43.5% residential. That's a combination of single family and multifamily residential, which from about 14 years of water quality data that we've collected in the area, we know that residential land use is often associated with higher bacteria concentrations in this specific segment of stream because our sampling stations are in fact directly upstream of this wetland and directly downstream of our wetland, which is one convenient and I will talk more about in the coming slides. Our second largest land use in the area was commercial, followed quickly by industrial, both which are pretty well correlated with heavy metal runoff, and especially industrial having higher concentrations of those metals, which are harmful to human health as well as fish and wildlife, and it goes on from there. So the last two figures I wanted to point out on this slide was developing residential in the Salem Area Comprehensive Plan is about 2% for our catchment area, and that ties back to the residential land use that we see displayed there. Can everybody see that legend all right, or should I explain that? Yeah? Okay. And then impervious surfaces clock in at about 32%, which is where that's mainly water quantity that we're concerned about in that figure, and it's the anthropogenic or human-caused addition to discharge, being the volume of water per time, into our wetland area. Hope you guys followed that. So unfortunately, there are tons of services that wetlands like Claggett Creek Wetland provide to the residents of the city, but we can't really go through all of those in this presentation. It would be its own presentation. And in fact, we're just working through some of the methodology that goes into evaluating some of these services. So I'll start off just by telling you about the flood protection service, which we are expecting to see the largest contribution in value from because of the housing damage that is associated with flooding being so high in the millions of dollars. And so we used something called LIDAR, which is very high accuracy elevation data, to come up with the drainage map you saw earlier, and to come up with an idea of how much water holding capacity our wetland has since it's a depressional area. We also take into account the soils data that we have at the city. It's a little more localized than what's available at the federal level, and flow measurements in the field to understand how flow is going to fluctuate in relationship to our wetland conditions. So like I said earlier, this will tell us water holding capacity and detention time, which is the amount of time that a certain volume of water will spend in this area, which will determine how much pollutants are reduced. So something we'd like to do in the future, but will take a lot of data and time, would be to model it and see how, if this wetland wasn't there, how would these flood zones change, and what residences would intersect with those new buffers. But something that's more attainable at this point, and potentially, arguably, more representative, are the detention ponds that exist within the city limits as a comparative measure to understand, if we know how much we spent on those and the function they perform, and we have an example that is similar in size, materials, geography, and function, then we can essentially compare the price and any minor adjustment in function to come up with a representative value of our own. This is called the replacement cost method, which is used in economics quite a bit, and it works because it's conventional and it's practiced, which means that it's generally accepted, which if any of you are economics people, that speaks to the willingness to pay of consumers for an infrastructure project. Second service I'd like to walk you through is the water purification service that our wetland provides. Like I mentioned earlier, we have about 14 years of water quality data that is fairly localized to our wetland and can tell us a lot about what pollutants are being removed, what pollutants are coming in, and at what magnitude. So using both of those data, both of those datas, that can inform how much pollutant load is being reduced, how much the temperature coming in is being controlled, and how much suspended solids are being reduced, which suspended solids have a lot to do with fish habitat and the warming of water, making it inhabitable for many species. To the right is just a snapshot of some of the data that we have, which is very statistically significant since it's derived from a large database. And you'll see that the gray boxes represent median values of turbidity, or the suspended solids quantity, and the gray box on the left is downstream of our wetland, and just directly, or almost directly upstream of our wetland is the gray box on the right. And you can see that 14 years of data is proving that our wetland area is actually reducing turbidity, which is just one example of many of the pollutants you've heard about tonight so far. And we would probably take a similar approach in this case, or at least this is seeming to be the best approach at this point in time, where we would do a replacement cost approach with green stormwater infrastructure, which is a structural stormwater best management practice that aims at exactly that, water purification. And so if we can find something that's similar, again, in size, geography, materials, and function, and is generally accepted, has been practiced in the past, then we feel that we can justify, and many economists use that reasoning to justify this method as a significant comparison. And the last major service, per se, that we'll go over in this portion of the symposium is the mitigation value that exists in the wetland, since it is a mitigation site. Some of the data we had to collect was what the project costs were, and how many mitigation credits were earned. So just to explain that a little bit, the diagram to your right shows exactly kind of how, in a very basic form, how mitigation credits and mitigation banking works. Basically, a developer, if they impact a wetland, they have to offset that impact somewhere else, and they can do so by purchasing a credit, or they can require a credit from a regulatory agency that approves their enhancement or their mitigation efforts of another wetland area. And this is all predominantly supervised at the federal level and in the state level a little bit. They get involved with the Department of State Lands. And make sure it's very formal, it's very exact to make sure that the mitigation is effective. And like you heard earlier, our wetland actually exceeded its expectations for mitigation a little bit, and that's why on the bottom bullet point here, I have that the price of surplus credits values to be, it's around $1,100. There was like 0.41 additional credits that were earned, and they're like $10,000 a piece. And the value of mitigation so far that we know is that there was about $343,000 invested by the Urban Renewal Agency into this mitigation project. And so we're just continuing to collect this data and to balance these numbers and come to an equilibrium eventually.
So the methods you've heard from so far are more hard and fast. We can go out in the field, we can go out there with a probe, we can measure the water quality, we can do a lot of stuff in the field. But another method, another facet of this project is going to be a hedonic price method. It's used to do consumer pricing index or to evaluate, say, your home. And we've done a lot of literature review on a particular study that was done on Portland's wetlands that use the exact same method. We met with the author of the paper and spoke with him and got his ideas. And he walked us through his methods for how he did it, and we're going to use, oh goodness, you can't see it now. Well, anyway, we're using his methods to do a similar study in the Salem area streams. So one of the things that it looks at is it takes a bunch of housing data. So it takes like the square footage size of the house, number of bedrooms, bathrooms, all sorts of data for the house. So what it does is it's called normalizing the value of the home. So it takes all of this data. So if you were to look at all of these homes in a neighborhood, I'm going to use South Salem, for example, around Waln, where the Battle Creek property is. Where the Battle Creek property is down in South Salem, where the old golf course was. There's a ton of homes there recently sold within the last few years. We can look at all that home data. We can normalize it so that all of the data looks exactly the same. And then we can look at the price of the home and how the wetland affects the price of the home. So, oh, there we go. My clicker doesn't want to work now. Can you just go one slide forward, Meredith, please? Hey, there we go. So this is what I was talking about here. So this is the Waln wetland here down in South Salem at the Battle Creek property. And say we could take a home here and we could look at several different facets of the home. And we would look at this for every single home. So these black lines represent, so this one here would be like its proximity to the wetland, its proximity to a school, a bus stop, the nearest creek. And that can tell us a lot of things about the wetland and how the wetland is affecting the price of the homes in the area. So we would look at all of the home sales within the Salem urban growth boundary for the last 2 years. It's a lot of homes. The study that was done in Portland, they analyzed about 14,250 homes in a very large database, and there was about 36 different data points that they took to normalize the data and make it look pretty. So the findings of the study, this is the findings of the study from Portland. This is not the findings of our own study. So this is just something that you can possibly look forward to within the next about year or so. These analyses take a very long time. But for the homes in Portland, for every about 1,000 feet that got closer to the wetland, there was an increase in the home price of $436. For every acre increase in size of the wetland, it increased $24 of the homes, and the wetland type had no significance. So what that means is that no matter what type of wetland there are, they were categorized as about 7 different types of wetlands. That wetland type did not affect the home. So moving, Trevor, can you hit me one more slide forward? The clicker's being mean. Oh my gosh, never mind. There it goes. Future of our project. So we're trying to do all of the wetlands. So like was mentioned in the beginning, we're trying to create a holistic model that we could use to apply to all of the wetlands. Gosh, darn it. Set that down.
bear with us.
I like to talk with my hands, and it doesn't work when you're holding things in your hands. But anyway, we're trying to make a model that will work for all the wetlands in Salem, so we're going to look at all the other ones. Like we said, we're really working on Claggett Wetland right now. The cool thing about Claggett Wetland is it's currently wet. If you've been to Fairview recently, there's no water in Fairview, and Claggett has allowed us to actually go out and start to perform these analyses and use our sonde and our probes to take this data so that we can go ahead and get a start, refine our data, and make an analysis that will continue to work for the wetlands that future stream crews can use, and that we can create a model that will be used for years to come. So that's wetlands, and now we're going to have Cody, Suzanne, and Linda are all going to come up, and they're going to talk to you about macroinvertebrates.
All right.
Oh no.
Did not work again. Well, aloha, everybody. Let's try this one more time. Okay, my name is Robert Cody Patton, and like he said earlier, we are the macroinvertebrate group. And this is?
Once more, Suzanne Ransing.
And I'm Linda Tucker-Cerniak.
Okay, so macroinvertebrates are aquatic organisms such as a crustacean, a mollusk, or aquatic insects. And they're useful bioindicators to assess stream health. You can see macroinvertebrates with your naked eye, whereas microinvertebrates you have to use the help of a microscope. But we do use a microscope in our study to help with species identification, because even though you can see them, some of them are pretty small. Okay, these small, tiny creatures are sensitive to changes in pH, dissolved oxygen, temperature, salinity, turbidity, and other stream parameters. So the composition of the community will be affected by episodes of poor water quality as well as chronically poor conditions. Macroinvertebrates can also show us the variability of stream health within a stream system in comparison to other stream systems in an indicated watershed area. Okay, and the purpose of this pilot project was to determine the viability of using a macroinvertebrate study as a tool to help assess Salem streams and to provide a broader ecological understanding of Salem streams, and also hopefully future expansion of scientific tools to be used by Salem stream crew. And now I'll hand over the mic to Sue, and she'll elaborate on our methodology.
So how did we determine what study areas we were going to use? Previously in this lovely lecture, you learned that we have many watersheds, 7 primary ones. We chose 5 of those primary watersheds to be our study point for this pilot project. Within those watersheds, we chose 5 streams, 1 stream per watershed, to represent where our studies were going to be from. Why we chose these streams was based on several different factors. We based this off of a previous macroinvertebrate study that was done in 2000 in the city of Salem, and we also used EPA standards. These streams show representations of varied use, such as residential, schools, parks, industrial, and otherwise. And we wanted to see how these streams change over their uses and over the area, and what might be impacting them from watershed to watershed. So this is an example of one of our stream surveys. You've heard a lot about Claggett tonight. Bear with me for one more second with Claggett. So each of our streams had 4 reaches that we did. Each of these reaches had 3, each of the reaches were 100 meters in length, and each one of them had 3 plots within them. Each of the plots were spaced 50 meters apart, and each of the reaches were spaced 150 meters apart from each other. Why we did this spacing was to show variation not only from reach to reach, but also from plot to plot, to see if little changes were made in that little bit of space, so we could see the variation of other factors and other stream quality that may happen. So how do we get our information? We used a KickNet to collect our samples. If you'd like to see a KickNet or any of our tools, it will be available out on our table out there, and in just a second I'll actually show you a video of how we get our samples into our KickNet. It's actually pretty fun. So once we had our little buggies and gastropodia and worms in our KickNet, we then removed them from the KickNet, pulled the samples, and then took them back to the office so we could do proper identification underneath a dissecting microscope that the city kindly and happily provided to us just for this study. It's pretty darn cool. So to do proof of concept, we needed to know what the water quality was within each of our streams. So at each plot, we used a YSI SON, which is this interesting contraption that you see holding me there, and it will actually be out on a table provided. And so the YSI SON measured certain quality parameters within the stream, such as pH, temperature, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, and other such things. And then on top of that, we measured and looked at some of the other stream conditions, noting if we saw other species within the area, such as raccoons, lamprey, crayfish, fish. It was pretty cool. And also what kind of the sediments were there, the presence of sun or shade, and also the water depth to see if any of those had a factor upon our study. So this is our video. It's 10 seconds of the 30 seconds that we actually shuffle our feet around to kick up sediment and our macroscopic creatures into our KickNet. Trevor, can you play, please? Oh, no. What happened? Sorry. Imagine music in your head right now. So that's just 10 seconds. For 30 seconds, we do this on each plot. It's actually quite a leg workout. I highly encourage you to come out with us and get that leg workout. Okay, sorry, the clicker is messing up on me. So Linda will talk to you about what we actually got to see out there.
Okay, Trevor, could you actually click on the slide for me? Thank you. Okay, so basically to identify these little critters, some of them are actually quite large. This one over here is a stonefly. They're pretty big. They're pretty easy to identify with just your naked eye. But a lot of them we actually need to get up close and personal with a microscope or a hand lens because they have a lot of really tiny details that you really need to really magnify them to see. So here's just a couple of the different organisms that we found. We found dragonflies, stonefly, caddisfly, water striders, and mayflies. And we actually have a few of those out at our table that you can look at later on if you'd like to. And once we had all those identified, we used the Hilsenhoff Biotic Index to create a water quality index to assess the health of the streams. So this was developed by William Hilsenhoff. Basically, each organism gets a pollution tolerance score, and then we add up all those scores and average them out for our whole stream reach. So that index can actually be anywhere from 0 to 10. 0 means that there is little to no pollution in the water, whereas 10 means there is very high pollution. So this is just our preliminary results so far. We've only done 3 of our creeks, Waln, Upper Claggett, and Pringle. So our scores are over here in this red box. So you can see that Pringle and Claggett Creek both have somewhere between 5 and 6, so that's kind of a mid-range pollution score. It's not really super surprising given that these are urban streams. And then you also see that Waln Creek actually has a pretty high score, 7.98, so it has a bit more pollution than the other 2 streams. So one thing that could explain Upper Claggett Creek here is potentially this dissolved oxygen. 6.61 is pretty low for an aquatic system, and that might be influencing what's there. But you also see that both Waln and Claggett have 9s here, and that's actually pretty good. So even though these have similar scores, the dissolved oxygen is pretty different. And in fact, if you look at these values for Waln and Pringle, all these values are actually pretty normal looking, and you would think that these were pretty healthy, clean streams, just looking at the data we got from the sonde. But based on our macroinvertebrates, it's actually a much different story. And if you also look at the number of species that we found, Pringle Creek is a lot more diverse than either Waln or Claggett Creek. So even though that Claggett and Pringle Creek have very similar scores, Pringle Creek is obviously a bit healthier since it has much more diversity. So the future of this project, we're going to obviously collect more data and do a little bit more analysis. But this is also a great project to get citizen science involved. This is a great thing that's really easy for anyone to do. It's not very hard to identify these organisms. It's not hard to collect the data, as you saw in the video. And it'll really get people excited about their streams and get them really involved. This is also a great way to get the whole ecological picture. As I mentioned before, just throwing a SON, you're getting some numbers in the stream. Doesn't tell you a whole lot, but you get to learn a lot more when you see what kind of organisms actually live in there. And it's also going to be a great expansion of scientific tools for the stream crew. This was a pilot study to see how feasible it would be for stream crew to use it. We actually were able to collect these organisms pretty quickly and identify them in the lab quite easily. We have a key that has all of them. All those pollution tolerance scores are in publications that we can use. So this is something that stream crew can definitely use in the future. And again, we have lots of exciting things that you can look at on our table if you are interested, including a microscope that you can check out those bugs. All right, and we're going to pass this off to the hydromodification study.
All right, so hi again. For our pilot project, we decided to do a hydromodification study. And once more, my name's Alicia Hubbard.
I'm Landon Glenn.
I'm Aaron Orr. And I'm Kyler Jacobo. And so this is our hydromodification pilot project. And so we defined hydromodification as the alterations of hydrologic and hydraulic characteristics to water bodies. And so the water bodies that we were concerned with were the streams that run through Salem. And these are examples of points that we would be taking during the regular season. So this one here on the right is a head cut. And a head cut is something that we define as a change in water surface elevation. So you can see just upstream, it drops down about 3 feet in a span of about 2 feet. And then in the other photo on the left, you can see an erosion point. And so these two processes are occurring in streams everywhere. And due to hydromodification, these processes are sped up and can cause various concerns within the city's boundaries. And so that was why we kind of developed this project. So we want to try to create a protocol that addresses these priority stream reaches that were defined by the city that had contracted work out and based off of our data points that we collected over the season. And so through our project, we're looking to set up a baseline of how these streams are behaving, and so that we can review them over the years and go back to these same locations where we're going to be taking stream cross sections and doing a granulometric analysis to look at the sediment distribution of the streams. In this photo here, you can see another erosion point, and there's quite a bit of debris and sediment that has piled down at the bottom of the bank, otherwise known as the toe. And in my opinion, this looks like it has rather occurred fairly recently in the last few years. And the concern with this location is that it is encroaching on some infrastructure. So as you can see here, there's a footpath and there's also an electricity pole in the back. And so if erosion like this continues to occur in the stream, it can start coming up to the infrastructure that will then lead to various economic damages and further problems. In this photo here, you can see a culvert. A culvert is a piped stream that goes typically under a road. And the concern with this photo is all that debris, sediment that has traveled from different parts of the stream oftentimes get built up at a culvert. So at this culvert, you can see this small section is nearly completely filled. And the problem with culverts filling is that it changes the flow that goes through there, and it doesn't work as they were designed. And so this culvert is now reducing in capacity of flow that can go through and can lead to flooding problems, leading to more economic damages.
This graph is meant to highlight the significance and impact of hydromodification due to urbanization on water bodies. Q right here represents discharge or amount of water transferred over some period of time. In this scenario, it's the unurbanized watershed's response to a rainfall event. So It rains, and then that water, or a majority of it, is allowed to infiltrate through permeable surfaces and slowly seep into the stream. This lag time represents the difference between the peak in rainfall discharge and the peak in unurbanized watershed response discharge. However, in an urbanized environment, a lot of that water runs off concrete and asphalt and other impervious surfaces, and causes the peak discharge not only to be higher, but also for it to happen sooner. One of the kind of perpetual goals of hydrologic monitoring and management is to try to get this urbanized watershed response to look more like this unurbanized watershed response.
And now to the methodology of our project. So, our mobile devices that the city provided us with have an accuracy, of about 10 feet. And with our project, precision is really important because it creates accurate data that ensures that it can be repeated in the following years. And so the city provided us with a GPS receiving device, the Arrow 100, that you can see Aaron actually wearing. It's a little silly, you wear it in a hat on your head, but it's right there, and it has an accuracy of about 7 inches, which is exactly what we needed. It's more accurate. And right here, also in that picture, you can see Aaron testing the accuracy of the GPS at a USGS benchmark out by the correctional facility. It's a known elevation. And so once we calibrated the GPS, we were able to go out to our site at Clark Creek, where we went out and we identified the areas that we wanted to do our cross sections at. We set up hubs, and at these hubs, we took precise coordinate locations for where we took them, just in case in the following year somebody stumbles upon it and takes it out, or it gets removed for any other reason. We have that point, so it ensures that it can be replicated. And so our 3 sites here we chose based on various reasons. For site 1, we thought that it was a pretty good, it represented the stream as a whole, whereas site number 2, there's a plunge pool there. And this is a site of not only active erosion, but also deposition as well. And then site number 3 is directly in front of a culvert. And so this is an area of just deposition.
So after we chose our sites and set our hubs, our next job was to create these cross sections. In order to do so, we were lucky enough to go out with Greg, and he taught us how to use the city's auto level and also the rod in order to create the cross sections. And so the basic methodology was we set the auto level at the hub, and then we projected across the stream and took various elevation points to get basically an XY graph of each elevation point to get a cross section of the stream. So the points that we kind of wanted to look at specifically were the top of both of the banks, the 2 toes of the banks, and the thowweg, which is the deepest part of the stream. And so this graph is showing site 1 at Clark Creek Park. And the 0 right there is our hub. And the reason that we wanted to set our hubs in extremely specific locations was so that our project could be repeatable and future stream crews could go to the exact same location that we were at, and we could get a really good idea of how our streams are changing throughout the years. So what we want to see is this exact site in 2018, 2020, and 2025, and hopefully further on, so that we can see how urbanization upstream is affecting these streams and making them more urbanized, or how city projects are taking these streams to a more natural state.
After establishing those cross-sectional areas that we were going to observe, we did some granulometric analysis, or pebble counts, at these different areas. On the left is a picture of Landon holding up a rock we found at that first cross-section site, and on the right is a picture of the gravelometer itself. Here's another top-down shot of it. These are represented in millimeters. Right in between here, it's going to be about an inch in diameter for sediment size. Here are the results we found at those 3 cross-sections. At that first area, there were a lot of fines, a large amount of very small sediment in that less than 2 millimeter range with a small smattering of gravel deposits. Right beneath that plunge pool is a higher concentration of gravel deposits, which is more indicative of that deposition area. And then right in front of that culvert, we had a lot of large cobbles, which was expected because it takes a lot of energy to get those larger materials through the culvert. With these data, we hope to establish a baseline to see how this changes over the years, but we can also determine the severity of erosion during different flood events.
So as Aaron mentioned, we're looking to then take the data that we just collected and apply it by using the city's known historic discharges for the streams that we're looking at. So the streams we decided to monitor are Croizen Creek, Glen Creek, and Clark Creek, as we already have. And so with the data, then we're going to try to interpret when at certain discharges and certain storm events we would expect erosion to occur at the cross sections. In addition, we'd like to use the B-STEM model, which stands for the Bank Stability and Toe Erosion model that's put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's to provide a further, more in-depth analysis of the banks themselves. And so, as you can see in the image, it uses the cross-sectional data that we use from the auto level, and then it also takes into account the type of soil and the depths of the soil layers, in addition to the vegetation that is there and the slopes of the banks themselves, to predict, again, when erosion would be occurring and at what discharges we would see it. And so we're setting up this monitoring plan for the future so that stream crew next year and the next year can come back and look at the same locations we set. Until then, we'll continue to set up our monitoring locations within the city. And now Meredith and Josh are going to be wrapping up our presentation.
All right. So we've seen everything we've done so far this year, and just looking briefly into the future, what do we plan to keep doing with Stream Crew after all of us are hopefully off and gainfully employed somewhere else? So as you said before, we're looking at more of managing our streams as assets, not just conveying water, but getting data on these streams and understanding them in our watersheds. We want to use our data collecting apps to keep collecting data, informing our decision making on our level and at the city level, as well as taking our special projects that our interns have done and incorporating them into our annual cleaning schedule and help growing the internship as it progresses in time. And then just using the data that we're collecting to better understand the watersheds that make up the city that we all live in.
The stream cleaning crew has accomplished a lot in the 2017 season, and there's no way we could have done it without all of the help that we have gotten along the way. The majority of the people you see up on the slide are the permanent stormwater staff from the city of Salem. Their expertise in a variety of different fields has really helped us do everything that we do every single day. In addition, we'd like to thank the Friday Forum speakers who have come along and really talked to the students and educated all of us on the various aspects that they see in their day-to-day jobs. We'd also like to thank all of the different areas that let us come and view and go on field trips there. Areas such as the Detroit Dam or various water treatment facilities really allow the students and the rest of the interns the opportunity to see how a lot of the classroom knowledge that they hear about is really being affected in real life. In addition, we would like to thank all of you for coming to our presentation and letting us inform you on all the work that we do. I believe Keith is going to come up here and say a couple of words to close us out. But after that, we would like to invite all of you to come ask some more questions and to see a lot of the work that all of the stream crew and all the rest of the stormwater staff have done. Pretty much everybody with a cool name tag is a permanent stormwater staff member, and we'll be more than happy to try and answer some of the questions you have.
Can you give these students another round of applause? They've done a lot of work. As Josh mentioned, these students will be ending their internship at the end of November, and so they will be looking for jobs. This will give you guys also the opportunity to take some time and meet with them one-on-one if you would like, and get some in-depth, some of your questions answered more in depth. Thank you very much. Good night.
That's it?